Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Brandy Keene, co-founder and senior technical advisor at Cerna. Thank you very much for joining me today, Brandy.
Hi, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Brandy, I always like to start these interviews by learning a little bit more about the person and how they came to cannabis. So what was it that brought you to this industry?
There were really a number of kind of interesting independent lines, I think, that kind of tugged us this direction. We had a hobby garden in the early 2000s, which was kind of an interesting time, a dramatically different indoor cultivation industry at that time, right, than it is today. And we also had a commercial construction company. And just kind of applying, principles of commercial construction to what people were doing in indoor cultivation at the time was really, it was kind of silly. We were doing, the industry was doing things very inefficiently. So that kind of led us to approaching things a different way and introducing some products to the market that worked, more effectively and efficiently than some of the things that they were doing at that time. And then in parallel with that, my husband was diagnosed with epilepsy in 2007. And so Hi.
Yeah. It's always good to have an extra guest on the show. Who's that?
That's Arthur. Who is normally very well behaved, but has chosen this moment to demand his mother's attention. So anyway, when my husband was diagnosed with epilepsy in 2007, our focus really switched from indoor cultivation as a whole to understanding cannabis as a therapy for epilepsy. And so it really very quickly became a labor of love and not just a business, right? We got very passionate about it very, very quickly. So.
Did cannabis work as a suitable treatment for your husband?
Interestingly, at the time, it wasn't legal as therapy, and
right.
And he wasn't using it as therapy. But the anti-seizure medication that he was given was pretty intense, some pretty gnarly side effects. And in 2012, Arizona, Colorado, and Canada all kind of had legalization efforts all at the same time. And we moved to Colorado, and he weaned himself off of the anti-seizure med that he was using and onto cannabis, and has not had an epileptic seizure since 2007.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, honestly, those are the stories. I have similar stories from my family that brought me to cannabis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to hear about those at some point. It is really interesting how having a directly personal experience with it will kind of change your perspective on it as a business, right?
Yeah.
And how many people in our industry actually have those experiences.
Agreed. No, it's for me, the short version is that my sister-in-law was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of Ewing sarcoma and breast cancer at the same time. And, she was on the entire kit of meds, and she turned to edibles. I live in Wisconsin. We live in Wisconsin. It's completely prohibition state. And by the time she had gone through treatment, her doctor said that she was the first person he had worked with that had gained weight during chemotherapy, and she was only on cannabis. And at that point, I was just like, nothing else makes sense. The fact that this is prohibited in the state is frankly disgusting, but it's kind of what drove me.
Yeah. And we have, similar stories. My mother went through breast cancer chemo, and cannabis was enormously helpful to her. And any doctor, anyone who's got experience or had a loved one who's gone through chemotherapy, one of the things that they tell you is they do not want you to lose weight. as best as possible, during chemotherapy. It's weakening you. And anything that stimulates your appetite, makes you feel better, feel like you can eat. I mean, it's only positive things. So if we can do good and do well, let's do both.
That's right. The one thing that situation taught me is that I'm no confectioner. I just can't do it. I got to stick to the words in the podcast. It's just not going to work out. When you started the company, you said that you had seen some silly things around the industry. What were some of those silly applications where you're like, there's got to be a better way?
Well, it was just more, I mean, people were just throwing 14 window units in their garages, right? People, and so we're adding inefficiency on top of inefficiency on top of inefficiency, and we're trying to use equipment that was designed for comfort cooling in the summer, and we're trying to force it to work in the middle of January, to cool a 24/7 process heat load, for instance. At that time, things were very different. Everyone was using, for the most part, single-ended bulbs and air-cooled reflectors, which, for those of you who weren't around in the indoor gardening dark ages, you would have these sheet metal reflectors essentially that had duct flanges on each end of them, and they would hook 6-inch or 8-inch fans to them and just push air through them to reject that outside. Well, that had a number of less than desirable effects, not the least of which you're changing the spectrum of your cultivation lighting by with various temperature gradients and condensation in your reflectors where your 1,000-watt light bulb is living. And there was just a lot of just things that were really inefficient. And so we kind of identified CO2 burners, just pumping heat into the space constantly. So we just identified, like I said, some means by which to make the existing technologies more efficient, and then to kind of introduce some technologies that are more specific to industrial climate control into the indoor gardening industry. And I feel compelled to point out, at the time, it wasn't the cannabis industry; it was the indoor gardening industry, right?
Right.
And obviously that shifted very dramatically in 2011, 2012, when legalization started to change.
What were the early days of Serta like?
We were a small company. We had 5 employees. We had a 3,000 square foot warehouse, and we were very family oriented. We all knew each other really, really well. And we worked together, we played together, we knew each other's families, that sort of thing. It was, I mean, like it is with anything, it was an enormous struggle in those first couple of years. We built a house, started a company, had a baby, all kind of in the same 18-month span, which was, I don't think I would recommend necessarily. And we were excited to kind of really be making changes in how people did things in the industry. I mean, we were really the first company to really pay attention to efficiently managing climates in cultivation. We were absolutely the first ones to the table to say, hey, we know how to do this better than anybody else does, right? And so that was pretty exciting. But it was also an enormous amount of work, and we made a lot of mistakes, just like everybody else did. And right. But our clients were able to learn from mistakes we made 5 years before anybody else did. So
from the lessons that you had learned from indoor gardening, how did things change when you sort of shifted, or at least started focusing on cannabis?
It's interesting because from a climate control perspective, it's really not that different. right? The inputs are different. Your sensible heat loads from the type of lighting that you're using may be different. Your photo period may be different. Your target temperature and humidity may be different, but your challenges are the same, and that is, calculating it accurately for the ever-changing condition, understanding, kind of how transpiration affects the humidity load and the cooling load, understanding what the crop wants, from day one to day 60, right?
Right.
And what the conditions are during lights on versus what the conditions are during lights off. But ultimately, it's really not any dramatically different from crop to crop. That being said, the way that people cultivate is a little bit different, right? If you're growing leafy greens, for instance, you have a tendency to have 10, 12, 15 levels in a space, where in cannabis, when people start talking more than 2 or 3, that's a unique
Right.
a unique facility, right? The cannabis industry, though, just exploded overnight. And we went from seeing 20 light cultivation facilities to 100 light cultivation facilities to 1,000 light cultivation facilities in a very, very short period of time. And what the applications or the equipment that works well in a small cultivation facility is probably not the same equipment you want to use in a very large cultivation facility. So the understanding of all of those different types of approaches that you could make or take, and the nuances of doing mechanical design in the context of all of these different types of approaches, because there's no wrong way to do it, right? You can make anything work if you engineer it correctly, but really understanding the best applications for specific technologies was really, really important to our growth, and cannabis really drove that.
It seems like sustainability and conservation are also really important with how you design facilities. How would you describe your methodology when it comes to a new cannabis facility and how you're going to lay it out?
Well, our sustainability and energy consumption, there are a number of important reasons to focus on that, right? Apart from a kind of moral obligation that we have as an industry to focus on reducing our consumption, there's also a pretty compelling business reason, right, to reduce your operating costs. And so our first and foremost, our most important goal when we start designing a facility for a client is, what are their goals, right? We need to understand exactly what is the most important thing to this client, right? Is it time to market? Is it ongoing energy cost? Is it capital equipment expenditure and first costs, right? So we need to understand everything we can possibly understand about their business before we make a recommendation. And what we recommend is the most energy efficient system that meets all of their other goals too.
Okay.
Right. And because, I can design the most energy efficient thing in the world, but if you can't afford to put it in, well, then I haven't really done you any favors. Right.
Right.
And so you really have to spend a lot of time asking a million questions. And I say this to clients all the time: you're going to get tired of the questions that I have, right? Because I really, really want to understand your business. I'm not going to force something down your throat because I like the design. You need to like it, right?
When you mentioned 3 critical issues for operators, time to market, capital expense, and I think the other one was efficiency. Which one do you see the most of?
Unfortunately, right now we're still focused on time to market and first costs, right? Yeah. Those are the primary considerations for cultivators. I think that having seen what happens to the price of cannabis in mature markets, right? What we've seen happen in Colorado, what we've seen happen in Washington, and understanding the competitive landscape a little bit better. I'm starting to see a shift. I'm starting to see people slow down a little bit in new markets. I do think there is still a race to get to market very quickly. And for a number of reasons. I mean, you want to establish yourself as a brand before anybody else does, to the best of your abilities. You also want to take advantage of those higher pound prices that are pretty typical of a brand new market, right? Before the market kind of levels out. I'm seeing people take more time evaluating new markets before they just dive in, because, oh no, that my state legalized, I gotta grow. Well, who are we serving? Right. And how much space do we really need in order to serve that market, as opposed to that kind of initial rush to just build out the most square footage you could possibly build out. So I am grateful that I'm starting to see the industry as a whole think more about efficiencies and taking the time, to really do a solid design before you just kind of dive in and start throwing equipment in a room. Oh, we'll think about it later. We'll think about it later. We just got to get growing, right?
What are some realistic conservation goals for indoor grows?
There are a lot of them, and we actually have a blog that we put out recently that kind of touches on that. What are some realistic things that we can really do to reduce our footprint and therefore our operating costs. We tend to phrase things in the context of operating costs, right? But there are quite a few of them. Data collection is a big one. Collect as much data as you can collect in your facility, and then analyze it, look at it, think about what's happening in the space. Look at what happens when you have certain irrigation events and how your HVAC system responds to that, for instance, right? Can you make minor modifications that affect the way that your HVAC systems respond and potentially reduce costs there? Facilities maintenance. That's a big one that we see overlooked all the time.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, we're going to have somebody to do maintenance. And 90% of the time, the grow staff ends up in charge of maintaining the systems in the facility at first, right? But it's insidious what poorly maintained systems will do, and you won't even notice at first. You just kind of slowly but surely start using more energy, right? And that's kind of a precursor to early failure. But correctly maintaining those systems is huge. This is less about consumption, but more about the cost of operation. Paying attention to your time of use and your peak energy use, right? We actually just had a conversation with some folks that saw a large increase in their electric bill, and were struggling with why that happened. And then we went and we looked at they'd made some substantial changes to their lighting schedules, and they had more rooms overlapping than they had previously. And they were unaware of this time of use or this demand charge from the utility. So they were using the same total kilowatt hours, but when they were using them, was impactful to their electric bill. One of the things that I really, really focus on that I think is going to ultimately be the primary driver for indoor food cultivation is water resources. And it's very difficult to make the case sometimes for condensate reclamation and reuse of water resources, because it's hard to make it pencil out sometimes for cultivators. They go, I'm going to put in this $10,000 or $15,000 water reclamation system. Well, water is cheap, right? Well, it's cheap until you're in a drought, right? It's cheap until you start seeing regulation affecting how much water you're going to be able to use. The Colorado River Basin, the states that get water from the Colorado River, I suspect, are about to start seeing some pretty substantial restrictions on the amount of water that they're going to be able to use. If we reclaim condensate through our climate control systems, treat it and reuse it, we can reduce our water consumption by at least 50% and possibly quite a bit more than that.
Wow. No, that was one thing I wanted to make sure to ask you about how droughts and other water issues that are, likely headed down the road are going to impact these indoor grows. Are there other issues that you foresee coming?
Well, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I think that we're going to be forced into restrictions on water use in the coming decades in any application, right? And we're not the least of it. And that's primarily driven, I think, by climate change and by scarcity of water resources. It's a real problem, right? And it feels like a problem that's way down the road until we get down the road and we've still got a problem, right? So if we can put in infrastructure now that allows us to be, I mean, all plants, none of them consume water. They use water as a delivery mechanism, and then they transpire that water right back out into the air, and you can grab it. So if commercial agriculture is using, 80 to 90% of our water resources, depending on which statistic you cite, and we can reduce that substantially in indoor cultivation with some pretty simple methodology. I mean, it really is just taking that condensate that's produced on your HVAC system, draining it somewhere else, doing some filtration, oxygenation, sterilization, and then putting it right back into your water supply. There are some folks now who are doing 0% waste, and there's a really, really interesting system out there that we're keeping an eye on. And we've seen a couple folks adopting it, not because of the cost of their water, but because they're having restrictions on wastewater and what they're able to put down the drain. So that's another area where you might see some regulation expanding into other areas is use nutrient water and where that can go, right? And so I would anticipate that also being impactful. So not just drought, but also restrictions on what we can do with used nutrient water and where it goes.
What's the zero waste equipment that you're talking about?
It's called True Zero.
Okay.
And it's pretty interesting stuff.
Okay. So CERN has been around nearly 17 years now. Over the course of your existence, you've worked with more than 800 cultivators. What are the projects that stand out to you?
Oh man, we've done some really cool stuff. I mean, just really cool stuff. I've always loved working with the bootstrappers, right? Those projects are always so cool to me when somebody has just saved every dollar, and I mean, just the entrepreneurship in this industry it's humbling and astounding and so cool. And when we can go back to a facility a couple of years later and see them thrive and know we had some part of it. So really every project we've ever worked on is special in some way, right? We have a project in Illinois. It's a longtime client of ours that we've done. We're on our second, I think, 100,000 square foot building there. That one's really cool. It's all aeroponics. I love working on that facility. I love that team. I love the size of that system. That one's always going to stand out to me. There's one that we did in Alberta that was two. I think they were 50,000 square foot buildings, but they had a couple of existing buildings already, and then that someone else had worked on. So they called us to kind of help with them. They were having some struggles, and then they asked us to design their next two buildings, and we did it and reduced their connected load. I don't remember what the exact number was, but their connected electrical load was to the tune of megawatts lower.
Okay.
Just by adjusting the mechanical design, and we also implemented some really cool free cooling applications or technology into that facility. And then right now we're working on a project where we're incorporating CHP into the mechanical design. I really love that project. It's very it's very complex when you do that because you've got a number of moving parts and integrated systems and control strategies and all of those things. So those are always really fun to me when people are really focusing on sustainability, reducing energy consumption, cool technologies, and just, you know, fun folks to work with on top of all of it.
What is CHP?
Combined heat and power. So it's on-site power generation.
Okay.
And so they're producing their own, and you know, their own electricity on that site, and you produce an enormous amount of waste heat with the engines that you use to produce your power, and it's very clean power. And so we've got all this waste heat, and then we're implementing or using that waste heat in the HVAC design of the facility. You can use that a few different ways. The way that it's being used in this facility is as reheat for the dehumidification operations.
Very cool. When it comes to a new cultivation facility, can you speak to the importance of getting the design and the equipment specification right the first time?
Oh man. Yeah. I cannot tell you how hard it is to retrofit an active facility. The amount of pressure that you have to cultivate, the amount of pressure that's on everyone to get cash flowing, right? Is unbelievable. Everyone is stressed to the nth degree when those plants finally go in the building, right? Everyone is, right? I mean, it's just go, 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 go. And construction projects take a long time. They're expensive. There's just money just flying out the door, and everybody wants it to start coming the other way. So if it's not right, then what? We stop and we go back. We ask our cultivators to deal with, you know, whatever they're having to deal with and just make it work despite, you know, whatever issues they may be having. And so that's why you know, it's, what are you going to do? Are you going to go out and rip out all of your ductwork, you know, and start over? Are you going to replace every fixture in the facility that you just spent, you know, X dollars on? But it's not just the individual designs at the end. It's all of the coordination that happens through the design and architectural and engineering process, right? Everybody's job affects everyone else's job. Please don't take a completed architectural plan set and then hand that to an MEP firm and go, here, design my mechanical, electrical, and plumbing around this completed architectural design, because you pigeonholed yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Now we're actually doing something very similar right now, where they're going to be forced into certain design decisions that, had those things been coordinated, they wouldn't have been forced into. And so that can be really painful. You can end up with a design that is maybe not optimized for your operations by putting the cart before the horse, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing that we see a lot is everyone's just so eager to get plants in the building. They may go, no, it's not all the way ready, but we're going to go ahead and load it anyway. Right.
Right.
And then that just drags everything out. Right. I you know, folks really need to understand that just because the building's erected and all the systems are installed and the contractors are done, it's not necessarily finished. Right. All of those systems need to be tested. All of those systems need to be, you know, have some level of commissioning and operational, you know, testing before you actually go prime time with them. And rarely does that actually happen. Almost always, contractors left, let's put some plants in, right?
Right. Speaking about some of the bootstrappers that you've worked with, how many of them wind up making it? And do you find yourself, you talked about there is a great deal of entrepreneurship and passion in this industry. Do you find yourself getting more emotionally invested with clients in cannabis or those bootstrappers?
I do. I mean, truthfully, and it's probably detrimental in some ways to my ability to sleep at night. I get emotionally invested in every single project and to some degree.
Yeah.
Right. And I think most of our team does. We all take a great deal of pride in the work that we do. And we genuinely want anyone that we work with, to have a great success. We get to know each other really well. We're going to work together for a long time. It's a long process. And so I don't think that there's any project that any of us have treated as just it's just another project. They're all special and important to us in some way.
Is a lot of your business repeat business from people either adding or expanding, or how much of it is new business, and how do those people find you?
The vast majority of the work that we do is either repeat clients or folks that have been referred by other clients. And then beyond that, SEO, we obviously SEO is a big one for us. So when people are Googling certain things about cannabis facility design, then they'll find us that way. Okay. But we also participate. I mean, we have a lot of content, right? There's a lot of information. We have an enormous amount of information, and we try to share it to the degree that we can, right? Mm-hmm. So our blogs are an amazing resource for people out on our website. We try to publish a white paper, as often as we can on subjects, that we're really knowledgeable about. So those things also, I think, help people understand how much we know and what we can help them with, and kind of, we'll drive them our direction. But that repeat client and that referral from our existing clients is where I couldn't put a number to it, but I would tell you the vast majority of our business comes from.
Of the potentially new states coming online and those that have most recently, which ones have you the most excited in terms of the opportunity?
Opportunity wise, we're seeing, I love New Jersey. We're seeing quite a lot of infrastructure in the Northeast, and which is exciting to me, because we're seeing that both in cannabis and in food, which is pretty interesting, and it tends to be concentrated in the Northeast. So got a lot going on there. I'm excited to see the things that are happening in the Deep South, right? They're smaller markets in general, but when Mississippi and Alabama are letting people grow cannabis in their states, it tells me that we've got kind of some mainstream traction, right? And traction with demographics that maybe were more resistant historically to the benefits of cannabis in their state. So we've got a lot of Alabama licenses that we're seeing go out. A lot of folks in Mississippi who are working on licensing and or starting build outs. I love those states. That makes me very excited. So Texas is expanding its program, which isn't is not big news, but a lot of activity here. This is my home state, so it's a big deal to me. So
did you move from Colorado to Texas?
We're actually from Texas originally. Okay. And that's where we actually were founded back in 2006. And then we relocated to Colorado when the kind of cannabis shift happened. And then Cerna is still headquartered in Louisville, Colorado. But we moved back home in 2020.
Okay. In talking about the content on your website, I definitely want to recommend anybody go and check it out, because not just the white papers and blogs, but you also have a fair amount of case studies on your website that I think in terms of bang for your buck content to consume, the case study really gives you, because you can find anyone in a similar situation and see what worked for them.
That's a really good point. And our team deserves an enormous amount of credit for the work that they put into getting those case studies done, because we don't just, we don't just go, hey, can we write something for you? We go to their site, we take pictures, we interview, we really, really, really want to understand what their challenges have been, what their experience with us has been like, but not just with us, within the industry as a whole, right? So there's a lot of information in those case studies that may be relevant to Cerna and what we do, but also relevant to things that you can learn about that may have nothing to do with us, right? And we try to do case studies from a whole host of different types of cultivators, right? So I think we have case studies from 5,000 square foot grows and case studies from 100,000 square foot grows.
What percentage of your business is food versus cannabis?
I don't know what the exact number is right this second. I mean, if I'm just guesstimating, I would say we went from being all cannabis over the first, say, 8 to 10 years. I say the first 8 to 10 years from the time that cannabis was legalized in 2011, 2012 timeframes to now. But over the last couple of years, we've seen a substantial uptick in indoor food. I expect that to continue. If I had to guess, I would say that probably 15% to 20% of new inquiries that we see are food related.
Okay.
But still heavily weighted to cannabis, but I expect that to continue to expand on the food side.
In November 2021, you changed the corporate name from Cerna to CEA Industries. Why the switch?
Well, Cerna is very well known in the space for what Cerna has historically done, which is climate control focused, right? But we do a lot outside of just climate control. We have a whole architectural design services, mechanical engineering, right? Electrical engineering, plumbing. We have certain products and technologies outside of climate control that we offer. And then we also wanted the ability to, if we were going to expand into other areas of the industry, to have something that's maybe a little bit more all-encompassing to controlled environment agriculture, and not just the specific thing that Cerna, has been known for. But that was really the impetus, I think, for that adjustment.
When you talk about having your own products and technologies, are these products that you manufacture? Are these products that you have exclusivity to distribute, or are these partnerships that you have with manufacturers?
Kind of all of the above.
Okay.
So we do have, certain, so all of our control systems and our control panels and all those things are proprietary, and they're actually, assembled in our facility in Louisville. We have certain branded equipment that is manufactured at other factories, but is Cerna branded equipment. And then in addition to that, we also have partnerships with other manufacturers where we specify and distribute their equipment to our clients. And the reason for that is, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but there is no one size fits all solution, right? There are a million different ways to make something work in a cultivation facility, and knowing how to quantify the problem and then apply the right solution is really what our job is. And in order to apply the right solution, we wanted access to all of them, right? So
what is the process for vetting potential partners, or what do you do internally when you're trying to bring your own products to market, just to make sure that they're sort of ready?
Sure. So obviously, a lot of data analysis, right? We're looking at independent lab test results for certain equipment, right? I want to know. I don't want to know what you say it does. I want to know what Intertech says it does, right? And making sure that we're looking at what independent labs say the results are. We want case studies. If it's a product that is already on the market that we're just distributing, we want to know who your existing clients are. We want to maybe talk to a few of them, right? I want to see it in use. I want to see a sample. If it's something that we're making ourselves, obviously we build it, we test it, we use it, right, and make sure that it's ready before we roll it out. There's always, anytime you're introducing a new product to the market, there's always the likelihood that it's going to need to be improved upon or tweaked over time, right? And so we're never resistant to that either, right? We always want to know, like with the control systems, right? I want to be able to look at that system in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years, and go, how is the system performing? What can I do with programming? Can I look at this and could I have done it better? Can I make tweaks to that one and make it operate better? Right. And so that's something that we're always open to too.
You had mentioned one of the realistic changes or improvements that operators can make is in the data collection. Do you recommend, for some people that means specifying smarter equipment out of the gate, but if they already have equipment in house that isn't necessarily smart, is it adding new sensing or IoT to that equipment in order to collect that information?
Yeah, even if you don't have a sophisticated control system that's monitoring every aspect of your facility, you can still put in monitoring equipment and sensing equipment, that tells you what's going on. And then you can go, oh, hey, room 2 yielded 4% more than it did last harvest. I wonder what happened. You don't want to go, I wonder why that is, right? You want to go, why is that? Right.
Yeah.
And so that means, okay, well, let me go back to the climate data over the entire harvest and see what was different this harvest than it was last harvest. Let me go back over my irrigation data. Right. So if it's not being metered or electronically captured, what are we writing down? Right. And then who's looking at that? Right. And that it's primarily going to be around, if you don't have a system that's automatically collecting that data, it can be labor intensive to do it. Right. Mm-hmm. And so in those cases, it might be more realistic to kind of monitor that for anomalies, mm-hmm. And just start there, and then chase down the anomalies. But continuous improvement requires data collection. And you can make the 5 or 8 or 10% improvements, the big improvements, right, just with your facility design. But then we're going to have to accept that at some point we got to be looking at 0.5% improvements and 1% improvements, and those are going to move the needle too. And in order to do that, we got to collect data. How else are you going to do it? Right.
What are your expectations for federal legalization, and how does that stand to change your business?
Man, who knows?
I know the standard loaded industry question.
At some point there's a federal legalization effort, but how many different directions can this possibly go? Right? Mm-hmm. Is it descheduled? Is it rescheduled? Is it FDA monitored? Is there interstate commerce? Is there not interstate commerce? Right? All of these questions, I think, are big questions. And then how do the state industries respond to a federal legalization that allows for interstate commerce? Right? Is it going to be like hemp, where every single state gets to define its own regulatory framework? There's so many different ways that can go. I think the industry as a whole right now, if I look at the industry, I think that the existing operators, for the most part, within the states, would fight pretty hard to maintain the state by state regulatory framework that exists right now, because what happens, is you end up in a situation where you have very, very big players that can kind of squeeze out, the smaller players, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's good for anybody. Right. Frankly. But does that mean that we end up with a kind of a Budweiser and microbrewery model? Right. Mm-hmm. It's so difficult to tell. I think that I would be thrilled if we could get a banking act. I think that would be enormously beneficial. It would, the kind of usurious financing that we see so often in these I don't want to say it's usurious. It's not loans, right? It's equity, usually things like that. But we see a lot of cultivators take some pretty bad money sometimes. Money that other businesses would not take just to get operational. And if we could get a banking law passed, I think that we would enormously benefit from it. The entire industry would.
I think so too, and I think that's the fact that safe banking has kind of started and stopped at various phases now. It's kind of taken the wind out of a lot of sales, because that just seems like the most common sense to do a lot of positive change throughout the entire industry.
It does. I mean, first of all, it's so funny to me how unconcerned we are the possibility that all these cash businesses might be laundering money. Right? I mean, if all of the 5 million other positive things for the industry that come out of the Safe Banking Act are not considered, to me, it seems like the folks who are kind of against giving the industry a safe banking solution, they might like the potential increase in tax revenue that might come from money trails, right? And so, I mean, I think that we all know that it's entirely politically motivated, right? And it's just whichever way the political winds are blowing that day. And there's a lot going on at the federal government level right now that's showing us how dysfunctional things can really get.
That is a very nice way of describing what's going on. One of the articles that I saw on your website that I found particularly interesting was what to look for when vetting a design firm. If you can give a high level overview of that for our viewers and listeners,
Sure.
What should people look for when they're looking at design firms?
I mean, I would say the very first thing I would ask is their experience, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's a cultivation facility, whether it's a dispensary, what is your direct experience with exactly what I'm doing, right? Can I talk to some of your clients, right? And those two things are going to be pretty important, right? Mm-hmm. Just being able to demonstrate positive experience in the space. We often see there are a lot of very, very competent design firms out there, right? But being competent in designing a house or designing a commercial office building is very different from being competent at designing a cultivation facility. And all the moving parts and all the coordinating pieces and all of the things the questions that you have to ask and the things that you need to understand. So those would be my two biggest ones. From there, then I would go to what specific experience they have with whatever your unique situation is, right? Your cultivation methodology, the size of your building, right? The size of your grow rooms, the number of tiers that all of those things, have you done this and what were your solutions and how did you apply those solutions? And then I would pay very close attention to the number of questions that they ask you and what those questions are, right? Because they need to know a lot about how you intend to cultivate before they can really help design something for you. And then lastly, I would ask them what different types of systems they've applied. Because a lot of times you'll see that someone gets real comfortable with one kind of technology and they kind of force it in, no matter what the circumstances are. So you tend to want to work with somebody who's applied multiple different types of technologies into these facilities as well.
Is that more common of an issue? Just because having dealt with engineers in other industries, they certainly know what's right. They know the right way to do things. So they do engineers in this space, do some think they have the blueprint that everyone should follow rather than seeing what the operator wants to accomplish?
Yeah, we see that a lot where, and it's a pretty typical way of engineering things is you get real comfortable with how to apply a specific technology, right? Look, we're all really risk averse. That's a common hallmark of an engineer, right?
Mhm.
Is mitigating risk. And so when somebody gets real comfortable applying one type of technology, is it going to work? Yeah. Is it the best for that application? Maybe not. And so they're a lot more focused on being absolutely confident that it's going to work, maybe than being willing to explore other options and risking, that they haven't applied it correctly, right?
Mhm.
And that's not, and please, like I said, there are a lot of really good engineers in our industry, right? That's and we should all understand that. But asking, like I said, someone who has historically done warehouse buildings and rooftop units, for comfort cooling, and then asking them to then design a cultivation facility, that's a completely different animal.
Brandy, thank you very much for taking the time today. I really do appreciate it. Before we get out of here, I wanted to ask, is there anything else in particular that we might have missed, or anything that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience knows about Cerna or yourself?
I mean, I don't think we missed anything. Like I said, I really I appreciate the amount of time that you spent with me, and I had a great time chatting with you. I would just say, Cerna is an architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing design company. We implement the systems that we design for folks, and we're also very, very agile, right? If you need help with your cultivation facility, just call us. There's a million ways we can help you, and and if we can't, we know somebody who can. So.
Before you got into this business, did you ever envision that it was going to be cannabis?
No. I was in technical sales and semiconductor industry, and if you had told me 20 years ago that I would be frankly an expert on cannabis environments, I would have laughed at you. That would have been was never on my radar. But life takes us down some interesting paths, and I will not change a thing.
Is it you sticking with cannabis and a little bit of food, or do you have, a desire to get back into that semiconductor industry?
I have no desire to get back in the semiconductor industry, although I am very excited to see that we're building new wafer fabs in the U.S. again. So that's very good news for all of us.
That is, and they're huge. Well, thank you again for taking the time, and I hope we get a chance to do it again soon.
Yeah, me too. Anytime. It was great.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me directly, david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. Make sure to subscribe to our daily newsletter and make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Brandy Keene, co-founder and senior technical advisor at Cerna, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.